Hey guys, Erin here with ROI Online. I'm a StoryBrand certified copywriter, so I work on brand scripts pretty much every day. And as I'm helping clients with brand scripts, notice there's always something a lot of them struggle with, and that is the one-liner. So if you aren't familiar with StoryBrand, the one-liner is pretty much the most important part of your brand script. And because it's so important, it's really easy to feel overwhelmed when you're trying to work on it for your business. So to help guide you through the process today, I'm going to explain some of the biggest mistakes customers have made when they create their own brand script for their business. I'm also going to give you some tips on how you can create a one-liner that'll resonate with customers, bring them to your door, and hopefully convert them into paying customers. So to start out, let's highlight why the one-liner is so important. So your one-liner tells your entire business's story in just 2 to 3 sentences. It is made up of the most enticing parts of your brand script, and it works as an elevator pitch. So for the most part, your one-liner is going to be at the very top of your website above that fold. So you're going to have your tagline as your big header, and your one-liner is typically the text that follows right after. So it's going to be the first point of contact people get to when they get to your website. Extremely important. You really want to win them over and keep them reading your stuff. You might also use your one-liner if you go to an event and someone is really interested in your business and wants to know what you do. You can tell them that one-liner and really create an emotional connection with them and include all of the best parts of your brand script in just a couple of minutes. So you want to think of your one-liner as the synopsis or the summary on the back of the book. So it tells you the high points, really enticing, and it's the reason that you end up buying that book, even though it's $10 and way overpriced. So to get started, let's highlight some of the biggest mistakes that people make when they create their own one-liner. So we see a couple of different mistakes. These are the 4 biggest ones that we see on a regular basis. The biggest one out of all of them is going to be people making it too long. So this is something really tempting. I'll explain each of these in a little bit more detail, but making it too long is probably the most common mistake that people make when they're working on a one-liner. The flip side of that is making it too short. You want it to be simple and concise, and so some people take that to the extreme and they make a one-liner that is way too short. The other mistakes that we see are people including the wrong parts of their brand script or not including parts of the brand script at all. Those are big no-nos. They're very easy to do. You might not think that that would be something that you would do, but it's pretty common as well. So let's dig into that first mistake. A lot of business owners want this one-liner to tell as much as possible. And that makes a lot of sense. You know, this is your first contact with a lot of people. You want to fit in the most important parts of that brand script. The issue is you don't want to put every important part into your one-liner, or you'll end up with something like this example down here. So this is from a fictional company that we're going to use as an example throughout called Little Dove Daycare. And the main thing to get from them is they create affordable daycare services for specifically focusing on children's development and education. So as you can see, that's a pretty long one-liner, several lines long. It's very visually overwhelming. And the biggest issue with that is that there are a lot of important things in this brand script or in this one-liner, but because there's so much text, they're getting lost. So people are going to be skimming over this. They're not going to pick up on the important things you want them to, and they're going to have to use a lot of mental energy to try to digest this. So we know if you confuse, you lose. We want to make this as simple and easy for our customers as possible. So if you put something this big at the very front of your website, it's going to be a lot of work for them to try to read through this Monday morning, no coffee. You don't want to make it harder for them than you have to. And another thing you risk is that they might skip the content entirely. I'm pretty guilty of this. You'd think because I'm a writer that I like to read. It's true, but I don't like to read paragraphs that are super long on a website whenever I just want to find out the snippets of what they do really quickly. So a lot of people are going to be like me, and if they see something this long, they're going to skip right over it. Don't want to make anything this overwhelming for your customers. And on that note, you also don't want to make things too simple, because while simplicity is key, if you do too simple, you actually make it more confusing. So this is an example from our Little Dove Daycare. They have Little Dove Daycare is an affordable childcare facility focused on growth and education. So true, to the point, basically says what they do. For a simple one-liner, this is decent. The issue with a bare bones one-liner like this is that it has absolutely no emotional resonance to it. You read this, it's very stale, it's very to the point, and it has nothing about you in it. So if someone were to say this to me, that this is their business, I would be like, cool, but why should I care? Because there's nothing in there that I relate to. And another issue you could run into if you do a one-liner that is too short, even if you really focus on internal problems correctly, is that it might not pass the grunt test. This one does a decent job of passing the grunt test because it says what they do, but it's still missing that emotional impact, and that's one of the biggest parts of your brand script. One of the cores to StoryBrand is you really want to tell a story that is emotional and that people will get on board with, because we make purchasing decisions because of emotions, not because of facts or logic. So the next one that a lot of people make when they're working on their one-liner is that they'll use the wrong parts of the brand script. And while all parts of the StoryBrand BrandScript are super important, they all have very crucial roles, and you need them all to tell a really clear story. They do not all belong in your one-liner. So when you're working on your one-liner, you don't want to focus only on the external problem, agreement plan, and failure together. Those are all very important. You need the external problem for context, you need the agreement plan to build up your business's authority, and you need the failure to create a sense of urgency. But when you put all of those together into a one-liner, they just don't mesh, and it doesn't end up creating an effective story, even if it's the right length. Another issue you want to avoid is only focusing on empathy and authority. So we know that empathy and authority are really important to really build you up as a guide. You got to have those in there, otherwise people aren't going to know whether they can trust you, even if you understand how they're feeling. But in a one-liner, those two together with just that, it does not work. So let me show you how these look. So this first one is going to be that external problem, failure, and agreement plan together. Education-focused daycare is often expensive. Don't enroll your child in a daycare center that doesn't give them the attention they deserve. Little Dove Daycare has been voted the top daycare center in the Texas Panhandle for 4 years in a row. So those are all good statements, all true, I'm sure. The only issue here, as you might have known when I read this out loud, is that they do not connect well. There's not a good transition between the two. There's not a solid theme to this brand script. We talk about expensiveness, and then we talk about attention, and then we talk about top daycare. Those are all great points. They might all be different internal problems people experience, but when put together like this, they just don't work. And for the most part, that's the way it's going to be, regardless on whether you pick a philosophical or a failure that sort of relates to the external. You're still going to run into this issue because it also lacks that emotional undertone that you need. That said, you can use failure effectively in a one-liner. It works really well at the beginning of the one-liner or even at the end. But the important thing that you need to do if you decide to use failure is you have to balance it with a lot of positivity and a lot of those strong, good emotions. And when you match it with the one or the external problem and the agreement plan, those are just a little more stale, don't have a lot of emotion to them. It doesn't give you the feelings that you need. So that's why that pair doesn't work together. And then for authority and empathy, we have, as parents, we understand how difficult choosing a daycare can be. Little Dove Daycare has over 25 years of experience helping children reach their full potential. All our staff is CPR certified and trained in supporting children with special health concerns. So that's all good authority and empathy statements. You need all of that information in your brand script. But in a one-liner, the issue with just having these two focuses is that it makes your one-liner all about you. We know that the whole point of StoryBrand is that the customers are the hero, not us. So if you do a one-liner but you only talk about yourself, it's still becoming all about you, even if it's an empathy statement. So it's really important. Make sure that has a lot of language that's about them and that you avoid doing these two things, because otherwise you're going to make one that's really not effective, even if the length is a good length. So how do we create an effective one-liner? Well, I'm glad you asked. These are the golden rules we follow at ROI, and they help you create a really strong one-liner out of your brand script. So first of all, the length. You want to make sure it's between 2 to 3 sentences, 3 absolute max. As you can see in the previous ones, they were about the right length, about 4 lines. Works really well. It's going to be different, of course, with the different font and different height that you use in your font. But for the most part, you want to keep it to 2 to 3 sentences and that length as well. It's important to note that just because it's a sentence doesn't mean it's short enough. So we've had some clients in the past bring us one-liners that are technically 2 sentences, but they have about 50 commas and half a dozen dashes in there and some semicolons, and that is not short, concise sentence. So even though it's technically 2 sentences, it's still going to be really visually overwhelming. You want to try to keep those sentences pretty short in length as well. And so what do you put in those sentences to make them really resonate? Well, this is the formula that we follow based on StoryBrand, really helps you tell a concise story in your one-liner. So the first thing you want to touch on is the pain and the problem. So this is going to be the most prominent internal problem that your customers experience. So when you're working on your brand script with your team and you get to that part where you're at the internal problems and you've made a list of a couple good ones, take a moment and highlight the one that is going to be the most impactful. So whichever one you hear the most or you know the majority of your customers' experience, that's the one you're going to want to include in your one-liner. You can follow all of the rules of this, but if you use the wrong internal problem that the most people don't experience or something that only a few of your customers have shared with you, it's not going to be as effective because a lot of people are going to read it and they're not going to resonate with it. So you really want to pick the one that you know the most people are connected with. And so then we move on, and the next part we need to include is the plan. So this is not going to be the same as the plan part of your brand script, that 3 to 4 step plan that you work on right after you do the authority. It's not that same plan. It's actually your business's plan to alleviate the problem. It's very short and simple. So the key to remember when you're creating your plan is it needs to address the specifics of the problem that you mentioned. And I'll have my example in the next slide and kind of show you how to do that, but you just really want to make sure that they are connected so it has a nice flow to it. And finally, you want to make sure you have a strong positive outcome at the end. So same as when you were working on that internal problem, when you're working on the successful ending bucket of your story brand, take a minute to find the one that is the most enticing. And it needs to relate to that problem that you highlighted as well. It's to be the flip side of that, whatever that might be for your business. You want it to be extremely positive and really connected with that problem. So here's how this might look. God, as a parent, nothing is more frustrating than not being able to set your child up for success because of your limited income. So that is the problem that we chose for Little Dove Daycare. It's got 2 aspects of it, but for the vast majority, every single person who comes into Little Dove Daycare, they're wanting someone who's going to really care about their child's success, and they also want it to be affordable. They're really concerned about that income, and they feel it's really unfair that they can't get a nice daycare because of that income. So for the plan, we need to address both parts of that. So we have Little Dove Daycare offers affordable childcare services designed to help nurture your child's development. So we have 2 aspects in here that address the 2 parts of the problem. We have affordable childcare, and that's the flip side of limited income, really addressing that part of it. And then we have nurture your child's development as a way to help with not being able to set your child up for success. So this is a fairly simple plan. It's a little longer than we usually do, and that's because we have 2 aspects of the plan, of the problem. But for the most part, this is a really strong plan and problem. So then for the positive outcome, we've got so you can feel confident knowing their future has no boundaries. So it's pretty much the opposite of being frustrated because you can't set your child up for success. It's that feeling of confidence and security because you know you've done everything you can so your child can't succeed. But it's said in a really short, concise way that has a very uplifting ending to it. So we put that all together. We've got, as a parent, nothing is more frustrating than not being able to set your child up for success. Little Dove Daycare offers affordable childcare services designed to help nurture your child's development so you can feel confident knowing their future has no boundaries. So This one-liner is really well done, and I'm not just saying that because I wrote it. It's got a nice book into it because it really addresses every part of every sentence and has a nice beginning. You build out that problem, has the solution to that, and has a nice ending. Everything's wrapped up on a pretty little bow. So if this was a one-liner that I read and I was looking for childcare, it would really resonate with me. It's really well done. And another important thing to look at is the length. We've got 4 lines here, 2 sentences. Like I said, the second one's a little longer than I would recommend. If I were to do this for an actual client, I might suggest trimming it up a bit and maybe taking out some of the stuff about affordability or about development to try to keep it concise. But on its own, this is a really strong, good good one-liner. And another thing to consider is that it ends on a positive note that's positive for the actual parent and not for the children. So if you have a service like this, even though the children are ultimately who you're wanting to focus on, you're focusing on the emotions of the parents because they're the ones making the buying decisions. So this will resonate with the parents and has a lot of positive things about why they would want to choose Little Dove Daycare. So if you follow all of the rules outlined in this and avoid those mistakes we talked about at the beginning, you're going to have a great formula to create a one-liner that will resonate with your customers, that will bring them to your door, and that will help them get up the courage to become a paying customers and to click that little marry you button, that direct CTA. So if you have any more, you're looking for any more StoryBrand marketing tips or maybe something about sales enablement or HubSpot, we have got it all. So feel free to subscribe to our ROI YouTube channel. We have a ton of helpful videos that we post each month, and they're all about StoryBrand, HubSpot, or anything else you need to know about marketing your business. Thanks for watching and happy marketing.